Hi, my name is Charlie Kimbell, and I'm the Vermont State Representative representing Woodstock, Reading, and Plymouth in Vermont, and I live in Woodstock, Vermont. I'm going to talk to you today about a very important issue. It's important to a lot of people about how to look for property tax relief in the state of Vermont. In the 2024 election, voters were very clear that they didn't want to see any more increases in the property taxes, and what they already had was too much. So the question is, how do you reduce your property taxes? So I'm on the House Ways and Means Committee, and that is the committee that looks at taxes and how to raise money to fund all of the government activities. So what we've been looking at is all the different things you can do to try to reduce your property taxes or reduce your taxes in general. So I have a number of options that I've listed them all out on paper because there's too many just to try to remember off the top of my head. So the first is, it's easy. You just cut spending. Well, that's not so easy. If we're looking at the statewide education property tax, that's assessed on all properties across the state of Vermont to fund education across the state of Vermont. And everybody is brought up to market level, which is using the common level of appraisal. It's really technical. Happy to talk to you about it if you should have questions about it. But it funds the larger expenses, or all the expenses in the education fund, 80% of which are for personnel, are for people in the school system. Those are by contract with teachers' unions and other unions. And then of that, there's also the pressure of increased healthcare expenses. So it's not really that easy just to decrease your property taxes by cutting expenditures in the education fund. So that's one. So cut expenses. The second, how about a tax swap? Instead of property taxes, why can't you substitute another tax for it? Let's move it to the income tax, or let's increase your sales tax, or remove some other taxes. Well, the education fund is already made up of a number of taxes. Property taxes on homestead and non-homestead make up the biggest portion of it, but the rest of the sales tax all goes into the education fund. A portion of the rooms and meals tax does, purchase and use tax, all the proceeds from the lottery, they all go into the education fund now. So just by trying to swap out a different tax doesn't mean that the overall tax burden goes down. So a tax swap isn't necessarily going to be the best thing. There could be a one-time temporary buy down in property tax rates. And that's what's happened the last couple of years. So that money that's a one-time fund gets put on that, and you've got a lower tax bill. Everybody gets a lower tax bill because of that. So that's good as long as you have a one-time source of funds, but it's bad because they don't last. And so when the one-time source of funds goes away, then you've got a sudden increase in your property taxes. So long-term, that's not a good solution. One thing that I just saw was very interesting, and it's a deferred tax payments for seniors. It's interesting. It's almost like a reverse mortgage. So if you are a senior, qualifying senior, this exists in a number of states, then you could have your property tax, if you can't pay it, just put onto a lien on your house, so that when you sell your house, then the tax lien is paid off. I don't like it, to be honest, because I don't think we should be taxing people more than what they can pay. And also it takes away from, in many times, the largest asset that somebody has to pass on to their heirs. But that's one thing. Another idea, some had suggested in the Legislature commissioned a study about a net asset limit, is to look at not only what somebody has in their property, but look at everything else that they have, and then limit the amount of credits by the fact that they may have other assets, so they're actually wealthier than they appear. It's really hard to do that as well, because we have no asset test in the state of Vermont. We don't have the system set up to say, we're going to look at the value of your portfolio or anything else. So that has its own set of problems. There are some targeted exemptions which some states use. Targeted exemptions meaning perhaps it's just for senior citizens, perhaps it's for disabled veterans, perhaps it's for people serving in the military now. There are some that are on new property to encourage new property to be built, some for farms, and some for survivors of firefighters or law enforcement. So that is a specific targeted tax exemption for people that fit into those categories. Does it work? It could. It depends. All policies have an intent, and you have to view as to how much of that is actually realized. There's a homestead exemption on the value of your property. A lot of states use this. Boston is a good example. So what they do in Boston is they say 35% of the average value of a homestead, single-family homestead, is what you can exempt from property taxes on your property tax bill. So that builds in, it's regardless of your income, and you get that deduction from the value of your property, so you get a lower tax bill if it's your primary home. So that's kind of an interesting thing and something worth considering. So I'm actively looking at that one. Then we have an income-based non-refundable credit. We have that in Vermont, and that is looking at two different things. One is the amount of income you have relative to your property tax bill. And if you are under $90,000, then you get a reduction in your property tax bills issued in a property tax credit, and then you get that for the following year. There's a lag in it. There's a lot of issues with it. It's difficult to estimate. It's difficult to understand, but we do have it. And then it phases out between $90,000 and $115,000. That's the proposal. And then after $115,000, you don't get anything. So even if it's your homestead, if you make too much money or your property is worth more than the allowed limits, you don't get much of a break. There's also something called a circuit breaker, and that is if your income is under $47,000, and you'd be surprised by the number of people that own property that earn less than $47,000, but you can imagine somebody's on social retirement income, they've owned their house for 40 years. It's very possible. There's over 40,000 homeowners, I believe, that are in that category. So if you earn under that, then your property tax is capped at a certain percentage of your income. At the top of the $47,000 is 2%. So you could even get a credit back. So you can get money back from the state if your property taxes are too high. So that is another credit that we currently have. And then, next page, please, like Paul Harvey, the rest of the story. So the problems with the Vermont property tax credit, if you think about it, there's a lag. You've got that, you earn your property tax credit from the previous year to apply to the next year's property tax bill. So it's very confusing in that sense. So there could be changes in the laws, and you don't get the benefit of the changes in the law. The other is cliffs. You've got those cliffs that happen if you make over $47,000, or if you make over 90 or 150 or 115, I'm sorry, then you'll see a significant change in what your property tax bill or your property tax credit could be. And then also the difficulty of calculating household income. 90% of the inquiries for the Vermont Taxpayer Advocate are about calculating household income because it's so confusing. Johnny has a job working at a grocery store after high school, gets out during the day. Johnny's income is included in your household income. So there's a lot of issues with that particular process. There's a lot of complications. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there are a lot of options to consider when looking at property tax relief for property taxpayers, also for people that are renting, because essentially they are going to be ending up paying for that property tax bill as well. It's a combination of things, realistically, what we can do. We have to somehow constrain the spending for the program that is being funded from that, education spending, and we also have to make sure it's fairly distributed across people that can afford to pay. Property value is not a proxy for income. It is a proxy for how much the property is worth. That's about it. So we have to have a system that recognizes that and is fair and easy to administer, and that's what I hope to do in Montpelier this year. And I know the rest of the legislators are trying to find the same thing. So this is an update. Here we are 4 weeks into the legislative session in 2025. Plenty more to come.